He had $47 million. She cleaned offices for minimum wage. He offered to buy her son anything in the store. The boy refused everything. This is the true story of a Christmas Eve encounter that taught a wealthy man what no amount of money could ever buy, and gave a struggling family something more valuable than gold. Tell me in the comments, what city are you from? And subscribe to this channel if you need a reminder that the most important things in life can't be purchased. Trust me, you'll want to hear every word of this. The Christmas lights of Fifth Avenue reflected off the polished hood of the black Mercedes as Jonathan Cross stepped out into the December cold. At 47 years old, he was everything the world told him to be: successful, wealthy, powerful. His custom-tailored overcoat cost more than most people earned in a month. The Rolex on his wrist was worth more than some cars. He just closed a deal that would net his investment firm $12 million before New Year's. By every measure that mattered in his world, Jonathan Cross was winning. The street buzzed with Christmas chaos. Families bundled in winter coats, children pressing their faces against store windows filled with elaborate toy displays, street vendors selling roasted chestnuts and hot chocolate, their steam rising into the cold air like prayers. Giant snowflakes had begun to fall, the kind that looked like they'd been cut from white paper by an artist who cared about beauty. Store windows glowed with warm golden light, each one a miniature theater displaying scenes of domestic happiness. Families gathered around fireplaces, children opening presents, couples sharing cocoa by Christmas trees that sparkled with lights and memory. Jonathan walked past it all with the detached efficiency of someone moving through a movie set that had nothing to do with his real life. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from his assistant about tomorrow's meeting, emails from clients wanting year-end updates, messages from colleagues at the Christmas party he'd left early because small talk with drunk coworkers felt like wasting time. He'd been invited to 7 holiday gatherings this week. He'd attended none. What was the point? Stand around making conversation with people you barely knew, pretending to care about their families and their vacation plans? He stopped in front of FAO Schwarz, the legendary toy store that had become a Manhattan landmark, its windows displaying mechanical scenes of dancing bears and marching soldiers, toy trains circling miniature villages where tiny people lived tiny perfect lives. A crowd had gathered, parents with children, tourists taking photos, couples holding hands. Jonathan watched them with the distant curiosity of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. They looked happy, but happiness was a feeling he'd stopped chasing years ago. Happiness was for people who hadn't yet learned that life was about winning, about accumulating, about staying ahead. His reflection stared back at him from the window glass, superimposed over a display of a toy family gathered around a Christmas dinner. The image disturbed him in a way he couldn't articulate, his solitary figure overlaid on that scene of togetherness, like a ghost haunting someone else's celebration. He turned away sharply and nearly collided with a small figure standing motionless beside him. A child. A boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, wearing a coat that had seen better winters and sneakers that were wrong for the weather. His hair needed cutting, his face needed washing, and his eyes, dark and impossibly large, held something Jonathan couldn't quite name. Not sadness exactly, though there was that too. Something older. Something that looked like understanding. "Sorry," Jonathan said automatically, stepping aside. The boy didn't move. He was staring at the toy store window with an intensity that seemed strange for a child. Not longing, not desire, just observation, as though he were memorizing every detail for a test he'd have to take later. Jonathan should have walked away. His car was waiting. His penthouse apartment with its climate control and silence and expensive emptiness was 20 blocks north. He had reports to review, emails to answer, the constant work of staying ahead. But something about the child's stillness caught him, held him in place like a hook he couldn't see. "What are you looking at?" Jonathan heard himself ask, his voice awkward. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to a child. He didn't have kids. Had never wanted them. Children were chaos and noise and needs that couldn't be met with money, and Jonathan had built his life on the principle that every problem had a price point where it could be solved. The boy turned to look at him. Up close, Jonathan could see that the child's eyes weren't just dark, they were the deepest brown, almost black, and they looked at Jonathan with an attention that made him uncomfortable. As though the boy were reading something written on Jonathan's face in a language only children could understand. "The family," the boy said softly, pointing to the display. Inside the window, mechanical figures moved through their programmed routine, a mother setting a table, a father carrying a turkey, children dancing around a Christmas tree. The same scene repeated every 90 seconds, perfect and unchanging. "I'm watching The Family." Jonathan looked at the display again, trying to see what captivated the child. It was impressive in its way, the engineering, the detail, the craftsmanship of tiny furniture and tinier plates of food. But it was just a machine. Just gears and motors and lights. "It's well done," he offered. "The mechanism is quite complex." The boy shook his head slightly. "Not the toys. The being together." His voice had an accent Jonathan couldn't place, and a formality that seemed wrong for his age, as though he'd learned English from old books. "They're having Christmas together. All of them. Nobody's alone." Something twisted in Jonathan's chest, an old pain he thought he'd buried under years of achievement and acquisition. He pushed it down with practiced efficiency. "They're not real," he said, more sharply than intended. "They're toys. Machines. It's not real being together." "I know," the boy said, still watching the mechanical family complete another cycle. "But it's nice to imagine." The words hung in the cold air between them. Around them, families moved past, laughing and talking, their breath visible in the December chill. A woman with 3 children juggled shopping bags and held hands simultaneously, her face exhausted but smiling. A father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders so she could see better, and the girl squealed with delight. An elderly couple stood arm in arm, watching the display with the comfortable silence of people who'd spent 50 years learning how to be together. Jonathan felt suddenly, overwhelmingly aware of his solitude. He was surrounded by thousands of people, on one of the busiest shopping streets in the world, during the most social season of the year, and he was completely, profoundly alone. And this child, this small boy in his worn coat and wrong shoes, had somehow seen that truth with one glance. "Where are your parents?" Jonathan asked, looking around for an adult who might belong to this strange, too observant child. The boy's expression didn't change. "My mom works nights. Cleaning offices. She won't be home until morning." "And your father?" "Gone. Long time ago." The boy said it without emotion, stating a fact the way you'd report the weather. "I have a neighbor who watches me, but she fell asleep. I wanted to see the lights." He gestured at the street, at the elaborate Christmas displays, at the city transformed into something magical by decoration and hope. "Just once. Before Christmas is over." Jonathan felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the armor he'd spent decades constructing. This child was alone on Christmas Eve, wandering the streets to look at lights because his mother was working and his father was gone and his babysitter couldn't stay awake. And Jonathan, who had everything money could buy, was also alone, had chosen to be alone, had convinced himself that alone was better because it meant owing nothing to anyone. An impulse seized him, irrational and completely unlike his usual calculated approach to life. "Come on," he said, surprising himself. "Let's go inside. I'll buy you something. Anything you want. Whatever catches your eye." The boy looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "Why?" It was such a simple question, but Jonathan found he didn't have a simple answer. Why? Because the child was alone? Because Jonathan was alone? Because in this moment, watching mechanical toys pretend to be a family, something in Jonathan's carefully constructed life felt desperately wrong? "Because it's Christmas," he said finally. "And you should have something nice." The boy studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay. Thank you." Inside FAO Schwartz, the world transformed into a kingdom of impossible colors and orchestrated wonder. The famous floor piano from the movie stretched across the entrance, its giant keys waiting for dancing feet. The air smelled of new plastic and expensive possibility. Christmas music played from hidden speakers, not the tired carols that played everywhere, but instrumental versions that sounded like they'd been composed for a movie about happiness. Every surface gleamed. Every display was lit like a stage. Every toy was positioned to catch the eye and spark the ancient human instinct that believes acquisition equals joy. Jonathan watched the boy's face, expecting the transformation he'd seen in other children, the wide-eyed excitement, the pulling toward the displays, the immediate "I want that" that seemed hardwired into young humans in toy stores. But the boy just walked slowly through the aisles, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful and distant. "Well," Jonathan said, gesturing at the abundance around them. "What do you want? Pick something. Anything." The words felt powerful as he said them. Here, finally, was a problem he could solve with the one tool he'd mastered: money. The child was alone and poor and sad. Jonathan could fix that. He could throw money at it until the sadness disappeared under a pile of expensive distractions. The boy walked past the action figures, past the elaborate Lego sets that cost hundreds of dollars, past the remote control cars and drones and video game consoles. He paused at a display of stuffed animals, a collection of bears and rabbits and dogs with soft fur and button eyes that looked almost alive. His hand reached out, touched the ear of a particularly worn-looking bear, then withdrew. "You like that?" Jonathan asked, relieved to finally see interest in something. "I'll get it. I'll get all of them if you want. One of each." He pulled out his wallet, thick with credit cards that had essentially unlimited credit, physical proof that he'd won whatever game life was playing. "No," the boy said softly. "I don't need them." Jonathan felt frustration rising. "What do you mean you don't need them? They're toys. Kids like toys. Just pick something. Whatever you want." "I meant it. Anything in this store. I'll buy every present here if that makes you happy." The boy turned to look at him with those impossibly old eyes. "Will it make me happy?" The question stopped Jonathan cold. He stared at the child, trying to formulate an answer. Of course toys would make him happy. That's what toys did. That's what things did. You bought them, you owned them, and they filled the spaces inside you that felt empty. That's how the world worked, wasn't it? But even as he thought it, Jonathan knew it was a lie. His apartment was filled with things: expensive art, designer furniture, a watch collection worth more than most houses, a wine cellar that could fund a small school. None of it made him happy. None of it had ever made him happy. They were just proof that he was winning, scorecards in a game he'd forgotten how to enjoy. The boy walked on, weaving between displays of train sets and dollhouses, robot dogs that barked and wagged their tails, board games promising family fun, puzzles showing scenes of places most people would never visit. Jonathan followed, his expensive shoes silent on the polished floor, feeling increasingly out of his depth. How was he supposed to help this child if the child wouldn't let him buy anything? Money was the only language Jonathan spoke fluently. Take that away, and he had nothing to offer. They reached the back of the store, where a small display had been set up, less elaborate than the others, almost humble in its simplicity. It showed a simple wooden house with a porch, and on that porch sat two figures, an adult and a child, side by side, looking at a painted night sky full of stars. There were no lights, no moving parts, no electronic features. Just two figures sitting together, carved from wood and painted by hand. A small plaque read, "Home for Christmas." The boy stopped in front of this display and stood very still. Jonathan watched his small shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. "This one," the boy said quietly. "This is what I want." Jonathan felt relief flood through him. Finally, something specific. Something he could buy. He looked at the price tag and nearly laughed. It was cheap, barely $60. He'd expected to spend thousands. That's it? Just this? You're sure? You can have more. You can have. Not the toy, the boy interrupted, his voice so soft Jonathan had to lean down to hear him. What it is? What do you mean? Jonathan asked, confused. It's right here. I'll buy it. I'll get them to wrap it. You can take it home tonight. The boy shook his head slowly, never taking his eyes off the two carved figures sitting together under their wooden stars. You can't buy it, mister. It's not for sale. Nobody can sell it. Everything's for sale, Jonathan said automatically. If the price is right, everything has a price. The boy finally turned to look at him, and in those dark eyes, Jonathan saw something that made him feel small and foolish and desperately sad. Not this, the child said. This is someone to sit with. Someone who stays. Someone who wants to be there just because. You can't buy that. I wish you could. I'd buy it for my mom. She works so hard, and she's always tired, and she's always alone even when I'm there because she's thinking about bills and rent and medicine and all the things we don't have. I'd buy her someone to sit with. But you can't. So I just look at it instead. Jonathan stood in the toy store, surrounded by 10,000 items designed to make children happy, and felt something inside him break apart like ice under sudden weight. This child, this poor, alone child whose mother cleaned offices at night and whose father had disappeared, had just explained to him the fundamental emptiness of his entire life. I have money, Jonathan said, and his voice sounded strange, desperate. I have a lot of money. I can help. I can pay for things. Your mother, does she need something? Medical bills? Rent? I can write a check. Right now. Any amount. The boy's expression softened, and for the first time, he looked his actual age, just a tired kid up past his bedtime, trying to explain something adults should already understand. That's nice. Really. And maybe she does need help with bills. But that's not what she wants. She wants what everyone wants. She wants someone to come home to who's happy to see her. She wants to not be afraid all the time. She wants to sit on a porch under stars with someone who thinks sitting with her is enough. And I want. His voice trailed off. What? Jonathan asked, kneeling down now so they were eye level, his expensive coat touching the floor, something in him needing to hear this answer more than he'd needed anything in years. What do you want? The boy looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, that understood too much. I want my mom to have one Christmas where she doesn't cry in the bathroom because she thinks I can't hear her. I want to stop pretending I don't know how hard everything is. I want to be a kid again instead of pretending to be okay all the time so she doesn't worry more. And I want. He stopped, swallowed hard. I want someone to sit with us, like those wooden people. Someone who chooses to stay. The words landed on Jonathan like physical blows. How long had it been since anyone had wanted simply to sit with him? How long since he'd wanted to sit with anyone? His parents were gone, his father dead from a heart attack in his office at 52, his mother following 3 years later from what the doctors called complications, but Jonathan knew was loneliness. He had no siblings, no close friends, just business contacts and networking connections. No partner. His last relationship had ended 6 years ago when she told him, "You're so busy climbing, Jonathan, that you forgot to notice there's nothing at the top worth reaching." He'd been angry then. How dare she not appreciate his ambition, his success, his drive? Now, kneeling on the floor of a toy store next to a child who saw through him with terrible clarity, Jonathan wondered if she'd been trying to save him and he'd been too blind to see it. "Your name," Jonathan said. "What's your name?" "Diego." "Diego. I'm Jonathan." He held out his hand, and after a moment, the small boy shook it solemnly. "Diego, I need to tell you something. I came here tonight from a Christmas party I left early because I didn't want to be there. I've been invited to 7 parties this week and went to none of them. I have an apartment with 4 bedrooms and I sleep in only one because the others feel too empty to even look at. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and I can't remember the last time I felt anything except tired. Diego listened without interrupting, his hand still in Jonathan's, small and warm and real. You asked me why I wanted to buy you something, Jonathan continued, the words coming faster now, spilling out like water from a cracked dam. I think I wanted to buy you something because I thought if I could make you happy, even for a minute, even with something that doesn't matter, then maybe I'd remember what happy feels like. Maybe I'd prove that money can fix things. Because if it can't, then what have I spent my entire life chasing? Did it work? Diego asked quietly. Did buying me things make you happy? Jonathan laughed, but it came out sounding like a sob. I didn't buy you anything. You wouldn't let me. No. I guess I didn't. Diego squeezed Jonathan's hand slightly. My mom says that some problems you solve by throwing money at them, and some problems you solve by throwing yourself at them. She says the second kind are harder but more important. Around them, the toy store continued its cheerful chaos. Families shopping, children pleading for one more thing, cash registers ringing with the sound of problems being solved the easy way. Jonathan looked at the wooden display, those 2 carved figures sitting together under their painted stars, and understood what Diego had been trying to tell him. It wasn't about what you could buy. It was about what you chose to be present for. Diego, Jonathan said slowly, an idea forming that was either crazy or the sanest thing he'd thought in years. What time does your mom get home? 6 in the morning. She works the midnight to 6 shift. Jonathan checked his watch. It was 8:47 p.m. And you're with a babysitter who fell asleep? Diego nodded. Mrs. Chen. She's old. She tries really hard, but she gets tired. I snuck out when she was sleeping. I'll sneak back before she wakes up. Where do you live? Bronx. Jerome Avenue. Why? Jonathan stood up, and as he rose, he felt as though he was leaving something behind on the floor, some old version of himself that had stopped working years ago but had kept going anyway because he didn't know how to stop. Because I'm going to take you home. And then I'm going to sit in my car outside your building until your mom gets home at 6. And when she arrives, I'm going to introduce myself. And I'm going to ask her if she'd like to have breakfast. With you. The 3 of us. Not because I'm buying her anything, though if she needs help, I'll help. But because… He paused, trying to articulate something he barely understood himself. Because you're right. People need someone to sit with. And I've forgotten how to do that. And maybe your mom could teach me. And maybe for one morning, she won't have to cry in the bathroom because she'll have someone to have breakfast with who's happy to be there. Diego stared at him, his eyes wide. You mean it? You want to have breakfast? With us? More than I've wanted anything in a very long time, Jonathan said, and realized as he said it that it was absolutely true. Corner onto Jerome Avenue, walking with the exhausted trudge of someone who'd spent 8 hours cleaning other people's messes. She wore a thick coat that had seen many winters and carried a canvas bag that probably held her work uniform. She looked to be in her late 30s but walked like someone older. Her dark hair was pulled back, and even from a distance, Jonathan could see the bone-deep tired in every step. She was halfway to her building when she noticed the Mercedes. Her steps slowed, caution crossing her face. Then Diego burst out of the building's front door, running toward her with the thoughtless speed of a child who's forgotten to be afraid. Mama! Mama! He came. He stayed all night. He waited. The woman caught her son, held him tight, confusion and alarm warring on her face. She looked at the car, at Jonathan climbing stiffly out, at Diego bouncing with excitement. Who? She started, her hand protectively on Diego's shoulder. Ms. Morales? Jonathan said, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible, aware that he was a stranger approaching a woman with her child at dawn. My name is Jonathan Cross. I met your son last night. He was looking at Christmas lights in Manhattan. We got to talking and he taught me something important, something I'd forgotten. And I promised him that I'd be here at 6 to ask if you'd like to have breakfast with me. With us. Just breakfast. Nothing else. Just sitting together. Because that's what people should do on Christmas morning. Rosa Morales stared at him like he'd appeared from another dimension. Which, in a way, he had. The drive to the Bronx took 40 minutes through Christmas Eve traffic. Jonathan's Mercedes felt absurdly out of place on Jerome Avenue, where cars were older and buildings wore their age less gracefully than the limestone and glass of Midtown Manhattan. Diego directed him to a 5-story walk-up with a faded red facade and a front door that didn't quite close properly. The windows were lit with modest decorations, strings of lights that blinked on and off, paper snowflakes taped to glass, a small artificial tree visible in a third-floor window. That one, Diego said, pointing to the third floor. We're 3B. The one with the snowflakes. I made those in school. Jonathan pulled the car to the curb and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt profound. Okay, he said. You go back inside. Carefully. Make sure Mrs. Chen doesn't wake up. And I'll... He gestured vaguely at the steering wheel. I'll wait. Diego didn't move to get out. Instead, he looked at Jonathan with those two knowing eyes. You'll really wait? All night? Until 6 a.m.? That's 9 hours. I'll really wait. Why? It was the same question Diego had asked in front of the toy store, but this time Jonathan had a better answer. Because I told you I would. And because... He struggled for words. Because I think I've spent my whole life running toward things that don't matter and running away from things that do. And sitting in a car for 9 hours waiting to have breakfast with someone I just met. That matters. I don't know why. But it does. Diego smiled. The first real smile Jonathan had seen on his face. It transformed him, made him look like the child he was instead of the small, worried adult he'd been pretending to be. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. I'll see you at 6. The boy slipped out of the car and disappeared into the building, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who'd learned to be invisible. Jonathan watched until he saw a light come on briefly in 3B, then go dark again. Diego was home. Safe. Jonathan settled into his seat and prepared to wait. The hours stretched ahead of him like a landscape he'd never traveled before. He'd spent countless nights working, in his office, on planes, in hotel rooms, reviewing contracts and financial statements and market analyses. But he'd never spent a night simply sitting still, doing nothing, waiting for morning simply because he'd promised someone he would. His phone buzzed constantly at first. Text messages from his assistant asking about tomorrow's agenda. Emails from colleagues wishing him Merry Christmas with the performative cheer of people who didn't really care but felt obligated to acknowledge the holiday. Notifications from news apps about market movements and political developments. The endless stream of information that had once made him feel important, connected, vital to the machinery of the world. He turned off his phone completely. The silence that followed felt like jumping into cold water, shocking at first, then strangely peaceful. Outside, the Bronx lived its Christmas Eve. Families came home from parties and church services. A group of teenagers played basketball under a streetlight despite the cold, their breath visible, their laughter carrying in the quiet air. An elderly man walked a small dog, pausing to let it investigate every tree and lamppost with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. A couple argued on a front stoop, then embraced, then went inside together. Life, messy and complicated and real, continued around Jonathan's expensive car like water flowing around a stone. At midnight, Jonathan heard church bells, not nearby, but carried on the cold air from somewhere in the darkness. Christmas Day had arrived. He wondered what Diego was doing. Sleeping, probably, dreaming whatever dreams children dream when they've met a stranger who promised them breakfast. Did he believe Jonathan would still be there at 6? Or had he learned already that adults make promises they don't keep? Jonathan remembered being Diego's age. His father had been building his first company then, working 100-hour weeks, missing birthdays and school plays and the thousand small moments that children remember into adulthood. Jonathan had learned early that love was demonstrated through absence, through sacrifice, through working so hard to provide material comfort that there was no time or energy left for presents. His father had died in his office, surrounded by contracts and profit statements, alone. And Jonathan had followed the same path, built the same life, made the same choices. But tonight, sitting in a car on Jerome Avenue, waiting for morning and the chance to have breakfast with strangers, Jonathan chose differently. Around 3 a.m., a police car cruised slowly past, and the officer inside gave Jonathan's Mercedes a long, suspicious look. Jonathan rolled down his window. The officer stopped, and he and his partner got out, their hands near their weapons in the casual readiness of people who'd seen too much to take chances. "Evening, sir," the older officer said. "Everything okay here? You've been parked in the same spot for several hours. We've had some reports of suspicious vehicles in the area." Jonathan understood immediately. Expensive car, white driver, poor neighborhood, middle of the night. He must look exactly like someone up to no good. "Everything's fine, officer. I'm waiting for someone. A friend. She gets off work at 6, and I promised I'd be here when she arrived." The officers exchanged glances. The younger one spoke. "That's a long wait. You been here since when?" 9 o'clock. "And I'll stay until 6. I gave my word." The older officer's expression softened slightly. "Sir, you could wait somewhere more comfortable. There's a diner 3 blocks over. Open all night. You could get coffee, warm up." Jonathan shook his head. "I told them I'd be right here. If I'm not here, they won't know where I went. They might think I left." The officer studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, Merry Christmas, then. Stay safe." As they walked back to their patrol car, Jonathan heard the younger officer say, "That's either the most dedicated friend I've ever seen or the craziest," and the older one reply, "Maybe both. Usually is." At 4:30, it started to snow. Real snow, not the tentative flurries from earlier but thick, heavy flakes that accumulated quickly on the windshield and the empty streets. Jonathan turned on the car briefly to run the wipers, then turned it off again. The cold was becoming painful, but he kept his promise and stayed. At 5:45, as early light began to stain the eastern sky, Jonathan saw movement in the 3B window. Diego's face appeared, small and pale, looking down at the street, looking for Jonathan's car. When he saw it still there, the boy's face split into a smile so bright it was visible even from 3 floors down. He waved frantically. Jonathan waved back. At 6:07 a.m., a woman turned the corner onto Jerome Avenue, walking with the exhausted trudge of someone who'd spent 8 hours cleaning other people's messes. She wore a thick coat that had seen many winters and carried a canvas bag that probably held her work uniform. She looked to be in her late 30s but walked like someone older. Her dark hair was pulled back, and even from a distance, Jonathan could see the bone-deep tired in every step. She was halfway to her building when she noticed the Mercedes. Her steps slowed, caution crossing her face. Then Diego burst out of the building's front door, running toward her with the thoughtless speed of a child who's forgotten to be afraid. "Mama! Mama!" He came. He stayed all night. He waited. The woman caught her son, held him tight, confusion and alarm warring on her face. She looked at the car, at Jonathan climbing stiffly out, at Diego bouncing with excitement. "Who?" she started, her hand protectively on Diego's shoulder. "Ms. Morales?" Jonathan said, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible, aware that he was a stranger approaching a woman with her child at dawn. "My name is Jonathan Cross. I met your son last night. He was looking at Christmas lights in Manhattan. We got to talking, and he taught me something important, something I'd forgotten. And I promised him that I'd be here at 6 to ask if you'd like to have breakfast with me. With us. Just breakfast. Nothing else. Just sitting together. Because that's what people should do on Christmas morning. Rosa Morales stared at him like he'd appeared from another dimension. Which, in a way, he had. The diner 3 blocks over was called Sal's, and it had been serving the neighborhood for 43 years. The sign outside flickered, the vinyl booths inside were patched with duct tape, and the coffee was served in thick ceramic mugs that had been washed 10,000 times. The Christmas decorations were modest. Some tinsel along the windows, a small tree on the counter by the register, a cardboard Santa that looked like it had been stored and retrieved for decades. To Jonathan, who ate at restaurants where appetizers cost $60 and sommeliers recommended wines by vintage, it was perfect. Rosa had agreed to breakfast with the wariness of someone who'd learned that free things often had hidden costs. She kept Diego close and watched Jonathan carefully as they slid into a booth by the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming Jerome Avenue into something softer, quieter, more forgiving. "I don't understand," Rosa said once they'd ordered. Eggs and toast for her, pancakes for Diego, a simple omelet for Jonathan. "Why are you here? What do you want from us?" Jonathan couldn't blame her suspicion. A wealthy stranger appearing at dawn, promising breakfast, claiming to have met her son while the boy was alone on the streets. Any parent would be suspicious. Any parent should be. "I don't want anything," he said, then corrected himself. "No, that's not true. I do want something. I want to sit with you, with both of you, and have breakfast, and maybe learn how to be." He struggled for the word. "Present. Your son told me last night that some problems you solve by throwing money at them, and some problems you solve by throwing yourself at them. He said you taught him that." Rosa glanced at Diego, surprised. "You said that?" Diego nodded, his mouth already full of pancakes that had arrived with a speed that suggested the cook recognized hungry children when he saw them. "It's something my mother used to say," Rosa explained, her voice softer now. "When I was young and thought money could fix everything, she'd say, 'Mija, money is a tool. Important, yes, but you are more important. What you give of yourself matters more than what you give from your wallet.'" "She was right," Jonathan said. "I've spent my entire adult life proving she was right by demonstrating the opposite. I've thrown money at every problem I've encountered. And the one problem it can't solve is the problem of myself, the emptiness, the loneliness, the sense that I'm winning a game that doesn't matter." The food arrived, and for a few minutes, they ate in silence. Jonathan couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed a meal this much. Not because the food was exceptional. It wasn't. The eggs were slightly overcooked, the toast a little burnt. But he was eating it with people in a real place, and the simple act of sharing space and time and food felt revolutionary. "Diego told me," Jonathan said carefully, "that you work nights cleaning offices. That it's hard. That you—" He paused, aware he was treading on private pain. "That you're tired." Rosa's jaw tightened. "We're fine. We don't need charity." "I know. That's not what this is." Jonathan set down his fork. "Rosa, can I tell you something? I made $47 million last year. I have an apartment that could fit 6 families. I own a watch collection worth more than most houses. And last night, your 9-year-old son taught me that none of it means anything if you have no one to sit with." "He's wise beyond his years," Rosa said, her hand reaching out to touch Diego's hair with unconscious tenderness. "Too wise. Sometimes I wish he could just be a child. But life doesn't always give us that choice." "What if it could?" Jonathan asked. "What if I could help make it easier? Not as charity. As—" He struggled for the right word. As friendship. As the beginning of friendship. Rosa looked at him skeptically. You want to be friends? With us? You're a rich man from Manhattan, and we're… She gestured at their worn clothes, the cheap diner, the neighborhood visible through the window where Snow tried to hide the poverty but couldn't quite manage it. Your people, Jonathan said simply. Real people who know how to sit together. Who know what matters. And I'm someone who forgot and needs to learn again. They talked for 2 hours. Jonathan learned that Rosa had come from Mexico 17 years ago, pregnant and alone after Diego's father left. She'd worked every low-wage job imaginable, dishwasher, house cleaner, factory worker, finally landing the office cleaning position because it paid slightly better and had a bus route she could manage. She'd never finished high school but had dreams of Diego going to college, becoming someone, having opportunities she'd never had. Diego told stories about school, about his teachers, about his friends, with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of a child who'd been given permission to be a child. Rosa laughed at his jokes, corrected his manners, showed him affection in the 1,000 small ways parents do, pushing hair from his eyes, wiping syrup from his chin, listening with full attention to his rambling stories about playground politics and math tests. Jonathan watched them with something like hunger. This, he thought, this is what matters. Not the deals or the money or the advancement. This warmth, this connection, this simple being together. Rosa, he said as the check came, which he paid despite her protests. I know this is strange. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I'd like to be part of your lives. Not as a benefactor or a charity case or a rich man solving problems with money. As a friend. Someone who shows up. Someone who sits with you. I could help with bills if you need it, yes. But more than that, I could just be here. Have breakfast sometimes. Help Diego with homework, maybe. Be someone else at the table so you're not alone. Rosa studied him for a long moment. Why? Really? A man like you could have anything, anyone. Why us? Because, Jonathan said, and his voice cracked with the weight of truth, you have what I don't. You know how to love something more than success. You know how to be present. You know what that wooden display showed, 2 people sitting together under stars, and that being enough. I need to learn that. And maybe, if you'll let me, I can be the 3rd person on that porch. Diego reached across the table and put his small hand on Jonathan's. We could teach you, he said seriously, how to sit with people. It's not hard. You just stay. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. You really mean this? You'd come back? You'd be here. Every week, Jonathan promised. Every Sunday breakfast. If you'll have me. And if you need help, real help, with rent or bills or Diego's education, I'm here for that too. But more than anything, I just want to be someone you can count on to show up. To stay. To sit with you under whatever stars we can find in the Bronx. That first breakfast became the first of many. Jonathan returned the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and the Sunday after that. At first, Rosa remained cautious, waiting for the catch, for the moment when this wealthy stranger would reveal his real motives. But the moment never came. Jonathan simply showed up, consistently, reliably, without agenda. They established a routine. Sunday breakfast at Sal's became sacred, 9 a.m. every week, no matter what. Jonathan learned to drink the diner coffee and like it. He learned to listen to Diego's stories about school with genuine interest. He learned to ask Rosa about her week and really hear her answers, not just wait for his turn to talk. But it was more than breakfast. Jonathan started showing up on Wednesday afternoons to help Diego with homework. Math had always been Jonathan's strong suit, and he discovered that explaining fractions to a 9-year-old required a different kind of intelligence than closing million-dollar deals. It required patience. It required breaking complex ideas into simple pieces. It required caring more about Diego's understanding than about being right. He took them to museums on Saturday afternoons, not the fancy openings he'd attended for networking, but slow, wandering visits where Diego could spend 30 minutes staring at dinosaur bones and Rosa could sit on benches and rest her tired feet. He learned that museums were completely different when experienced through a child's eyes, when you weren't rushing through to say you'd been there but actually looking, actually learning, actually present. At first, Jonathan offered to pay for everything: better apartment, private school for Diego, medical insurance, everything. Rosa refused every time. "I need to provide for my son," she explained gently. "That's my job as his mother. But having you here, having someone who shows up, that's different. That's the gift you give that matters." But Jonathan found ways to help anyway. He quietly arranged for Rosa's company to review their cleaning contracts, resulting in better pay and benefits for all workers. He connected Diego to a tutoring program at a local community center. He fixed the broken lock on their apartment building's front door by happening to mention it to a contractor friend who owed him a favor. Small helps. The kind that don't wound pride. And slowly, something remarkable happened. Jonathan changed. His colleagues noticed first. He started leaving the office at reasonable hours. He stopped checking email constantly. He turned down weekend work. He actually took his vacation days. When questioned, he'd say simply, "I have plans, commitments I need to keep." His apartment began to change too. He started cooking, badly at first, learning from YouTube videos and phone calls to Rosa, who found his questions about how to boil pasta both amusing and touching. He bought groceries instead of ordering takeout. He ate at his kitchen table instead of standing at the counter. Small changes, but each one a step toward inhabiting his life instead of just passing through it. The biggest change came 3 months after that first Christmas breakfast. Rosa had been cleaning a building in Midtown when she'd fallen from a ladder, breaking her wrist and spraining her ankle badly. She tried to work through it, couldn't afford not to, until Diego called Jonathan in tears because his mother was in too much pain to get out of bed. Jonathan didn't just pay the medical bills. He showed up. Every day for 2 weeks, he came to their apartment after work. He brought groceries. He helped Diego with homework. He cleaned, badly, but he tried. He sat with Rosa while she rested, talking about nothing important and everything important. He learned to change bandages and remind her to take pain medication and help her to the bathroom when her ankle couldn't bear weight. "Why are you doing this?" Rosa asked one evening, watching him attempt to cook dinner, spaghetti that would probably be slightly wrong but made with care. "You could pay someone to help. Why are you here yourself?" Jonathan turned from the stove, and his answer was simple: "Because you can't pay someone to care. And I care. About you. About Diego. About this." He gestured at the small apartment with its worn furniture and Diego's schoolwork spread on the coffee table and the life they'd built together. "This is the first real thing I've had in 20 years. Why would I pay someone else to do it?" That night, after Diego was asleep and the dinner dishes were washed, Rosa took Jonathan's hand. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the help. For staying. For being here when you could be anywhere. For choosing us." "You chose me first," Jonathan said. "That morning at the diner. You took a chance on a stranger who promised breakfast. You let me into your lives. You taught me that showing up is the most important thing. That presence is the gift that matters most." 1 year later, almost to the day, they stood in front of FAO Schwartz on another December evening. The same lights, the same Christmas chaos. But everything was different. Diego held Jonathan's hand on one side and Rosa's on the other. They had spent the day ice skating and sharing hot chocolate, moments marked by laughter instead of price tags. Diego pointed to the wooden display in the window, the 2 carved figures under painted stars. "The family," he said, smiling. He understood now that it wasn't a dream anymore. It was his life. "Should we go inside?" Jonathan asked. "Pick out anything you want." Diego shook his head. "No. I have what I wanted." "Let's go home," Rosa said. "I'm making a real dinner." Home. Jonathan had learned that the word had nothing to do with property value. Home was Rosa's warm kitchen, the artwork on the refrigerator, and the worn futon where he often fell asleep. They turned from the mechanical family in the window and walked together into the snow, a real family, chosen not by blood, but by the decision to keep showing up. Behind them glittered 10,000 things money could buy. Ahead of them was the only thing that mattered. That night, after dinner, Jonathan sat on the couch with a mismatched mug of coffee. Rosa rested her head on his shoulder. Through the window, the city lights blurred into the falling snow. "You know what I realized?" Jonathan said quietly. "A year ago, I was the richest lonely person I knew. Now I have everything. Everything." Rosa teased. "We're still poor, Jonathan. Diego still needs new shoes every 3 months. This isn't a fairy tale." "No," Jonathan agreed. "It's better. It's real. I was dying in that old life, so successful, but so empty. I thought I was winning, but I was just disappearing. You and Diego made me real again." They sat in a silence that didn't need filling. Diego had been right that night a year ago. You couldn't purchase presents or belonging. You couldn't add meaning to a cart and check out. You had to choose it every day, through every Sunday breakfast, every homework session, and every badly cooked meal. Jonathan had spent 47 years believing success was measured in dollars. It had taken a child to teach him that the greatest gift you could give was your presence. Love was spelled Time. His phone buzzed with a work emergency, a crisis that once would have defined his worth. He glanced at it and turned it off. It could wait until Monday. Tonight was Christmas Eve, and he was sitting under his own stars, finally home. Diego had asked for someone to stay. By giving the boy what he needed, Jonathan had received exactly what he lacked. He had learned that showing up was more valuable than any gift wrapped in expensive paper. Sometimes, the best way to find yourself was to stop looking and simply be there for someone else. In the bedroom, Diego smiled in his sleep. In the kitchen, the dishes dried. In the living room, 2 people sat together, their lives intertwined by the revolutionary act of choosing each other. Jonathan finally understood what the wooden display had been showing all along. It wasn't the perfection of a mechanical family, but the beauty of imperfect people deciding that being together was enough. In a modest apartment that would never impress a colleague, Jonathan Cross finally looked around and saw real wealth. It looked like this. It looked like staying.